Welcome to Bergknifemaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at batch knife making and other ways to increase your production and productivity. So first off, instead of cutting out all your blanks with a bandsaw or grinding them, I opt to use a local water jet facility to cut out all of my standard blanks. They save a lot of time. I use Long Island water jet in Bohemia, New York, and I make blanks that I call universal blanks. I can then grind the profile to whatever shape I desire. But today we're going to be talking about working in batches. It is so much more productive, and it saves all of the different setup times on the different machines. For example, the drill press. Once you put the 1/4-inch drill bit in, and the stop, and you set it up with the backing plate, you're all set to just ream out each one of the holes. Now these were already cut holes by the water jet, but you could do the same thing if you were drilling holes. These are those universal knife blanks that I was talking about. Now these are all AEBL, but batch and production knife making works for any material. So what I'm doing here is I've got a coarse grit belt on my Origin Blade Maker 2x72 grinder. I use a 2 horsepower variable speed machine, and I really do the majority of my knife making on this one machine, probably with the exception of the drill press. In addition to that, look at the little piece of wood that I'm using. Instead of pushing with your fingers, if you use a small scrap of wood, number one, you're not going to burn your fingers because the material gets hot. But you can be much more productive because you can really push a little bit harder without any fear of slipping and getting your fingers into that coarse grit belt. So I'm going to profile all of the blanks that I'm working on. I was currently working on about, I think it was 9 or 10 blanks. So once the belt sander is set up with that coarse grit 60 grit belt, I do them all. Then I move on to etching the blade. So I've set my centerline etch for the thickness of the material that I'm working with, and then as long as the material stays the same, I can go right down the line from knife to knife. Whereas if you had to stop and just set up everything for one particular knife, you're not going to be anywhere near as productive. So now I'm back on the Origin Blade Maker. I've got it set up with one of my tilt tables. Now this is a bevel grinding jig that Jason Northgard and I designed and manufacture and sell. And it attaches to a standard 1.5-inch tooling arm, and it in itself facilitates production. It's a very quick, easy way of creating really nice bevels. But again, when you're set up, I'm going to do all of my coarse grit grinding, or pre-heat treat grinding with a coarse grit belt. Again, probably with that 60 grit belt, unless it's a really big knife, and then I'll go down to a 36. And I'll grind all of the bevels. So the other main benefit of doing batches like this is muscle memory. If you're making one knife, you kind of learn how to do it, yet you know what the feel is. But if you do a 9, 10, 12 blanks at a time, you really get pretty good by the time you're halfway through. Just a look at some of the different style blades, all right out of that same batch of standard blanks. Now on to heat treating. Since these are stainless, I'm using a heat treating oven. The cost of running this oven for 1 or 2 blanks is kind of high. It uses quite a bit of electricity. But if you can rack up a bunch of blanks in there and heat treat them all at the same time, you're dividing that cost, amongst the number of blanks that you're heat treating. I've got a little ceramic standing rack in there, and you can just balance each one of the blades on that. Now if you were doing high carbon steel and using a forge, you would probably still save a little bit of time during the heat treating process because you're all set up for it, but possibly not as much. Now after heat treating, the post-heat treat cleanup, I'm going to use a surface grinding attachment. This attaches right to that same Origin Blade Maker. And again, I'm going to run through a variety of belts. So it's really the belt changes that take the most time. So to clean these up, I usually start at a 120, and I'll run through all of the blanks, cleaning them up at 120, and then depending on the finish that I want to go to, I might go down to a 400 or so. But it's a pretty quick process. Again, if you were just doing one blank, you would probably spend more time, setting up that surface grinder than you would actually surface grinding the material. So after the post-heat treat surface grinding, I'm going to clean up the bevels. So as long as I didn't change the angle on that tilt table, I can go right back to it, go to a 120 grit belt, and very quickly and very easily, I can just clean up those post-heat treat bevels. They really don't take long at all. Now, the whole concept here is that by making batches, whether it's 3 or 6 or 12, you can just be more productive and much more time efficient. I like to get a batch of blanks made, bevels done, but then I'll finish them 2 or 3 at a time, so I can really put attention to each knife, or I can finish them to the customer's desires, whatever type of handle he wants, whatever type of bolsters they want, etc. So now I'm going to go on to the handles. Now I've reduced my batch. I'm no longer working on the 9 or 12 blanks. I've reduced it to 3, and I'm going to start just by working on the scale material and grinding the shape of the front of the scales. And I'm going to go through a couple of different belt changes. So I'm going to start with a coarse grit belt, then I'm going to go down to a 120, and then I'm going to go down to probably a 600 or so, and then I'm going to buff it, because you can't polish that front edge after it's glued and pinned onto the knife. Now look at the scales. I used to hold those together with clamps. I found it much easier just to use painter's tape. Now if you look closely, this is actually a felt buffing belt mounted right on that same 2x72 little buffing compound, and I can polish the front edge of those handles very quickly. Now, even when mounting the scale material, the handles, to the blanks or to the blade, it still saves quite a bit of time, doing multiples, doing 2 or 3 at a time. The way I do them is I just glue 1/2, I position it perfectly, I clamp it, and then I let that dry. I clean up whatever glue is squeezed out with alcohol. And then I let that dry, and I drill my holes and go back and drill the other side. But the point is, you do them in batches, you're just much, much more productive. And therefore, the final production cost of your finished knife, it takes you a lot less time and quite a bit less money. Now we're getting almost done. I just want to show you that you want to be quick with everything. I actually finish up most of the handles right on that 2x72. I make the curves on the inside and the tang side of the blade. The only thing I'll do is I'll go to a hand sander and then to a separate buffing wheel to finish it off. And that's it. Quick little video just showing you the advantages of making knives in batches rather than one at a time. Probably takes me this, maybe just a tad more time to make 3 knives than it would if I was just making one all by itself. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'd love to hear your comments back. I'd like to give you an invite to join us on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. By all means, post some of your own builds, images of your own builds. And please check out the book that Jason Northgard and I put out last year called Introduction to Knife Making, and that can be found on Amazon.com. Thank you very much.